My name is Jerry Gill. Today is February 20th, 2010. I'm visiting with Pat Adams in her home here in Dallas, Texas. This interview is for the O State Storage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Pat, thanks for taking time to visit with us this morning and for your hospitality inviting us into your home.
Surely.
Just thought, Pat, we might talk about you a little bit, and then we'll come back and kind of talk about maybe the Adams family that you, this weird family that you married into, okay?
Right.
Can you tell a little bit about your early life, about where you grew up? And
I grew up in Enid, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an attorney. My mother is a housewife.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you'd call it an idyllic childhood. My parents were loving and caring, and everything was just so normal. It was wonderful. Looking back, I appreciate that very much.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one sister that's 4 years older, and we're very, very close.
What's her name?
Mary. She's Mary Margaret is what we called her when she was young. But she married a Mattingly, so Mary Margaret Mattingly was too much of a mouthful. So
did Mary go to Oklahoma State as well?
She went a year and a half, and she had a terrible cold, and they thought it might be tuberculosis. And so she went to a sanitarium. Later on, since tuberculosis leaves scars, they determined that she never did have it, but she was the queen of everything, and it was a shame. Meanwhile, she met her husband, future husband, and never did get back there, so, which was a shame.
Can you tell me a little bit about when you're growing up, were there any high school activities you're involved in, community activities?
Oh, I was in a choir, a little sextet that we sang in various civic groups and so forth, and I had quite a lot of illnesses when I was in high school. When a dear friend of mine mentioned her memory is so much better, she said, well, you were sick half of the time. So I wasn't able to participate in, like, the drum and bugle corps was the big thing then. But so I really wasn't able to. I did some debating, and we took expression lessons in those days, and so we performed in that capacity. That's about it.
So you said your sister, your older sister, going to Oklahoma State, did that influence you to enroll at Oklahoma State? Or?
Oh, yes, she loved it, and I visited her when I was in high school, and that was it. And the rest of my family had gone to OU, so that didn't sit too well with them, but we didn't care. We loved it.
That's good. What year did you enroll, Pat?
In 1944.
Okay.
So that's when the waves and the wax had taken over all the dormitories and the fraternity houses. At least the sorority houses were spared. So.
Where did you live?
The Kappa Alpha Theta house.
Okay, so you're a Kappa.
Kappa Alpha Theta.
Kappa Alpha Theta. And your major, Pat, was what?
Business degree. It was just it was aiming toward social sociology and a psychology minor. They didn't actually have a major that I wanted, which was more of a, testing people for jobs and that type of thing. So that's the closest I could get.
That's right. Do you remember any of the faculty there, Pat, that were perhaps helpful to you or mentors for you?
Oh, I do. Dr. Foreman, I just loved him so. He was my psychology professor. And, of course, B.B. Chapman, that I think everybody in this part of the Southwest knew.
History 101?
History 101. That's exactly right.
So what was his expression? History 101 is fun, fun, fun. When one of his sayings.
Like that was for people who took that for a sure A. And I had a wonderful French Canadian man. I don't remember his name. That taught geography. He was just, the professors are just. I thought they were wonderful. I love my education there.
Were there any organizations other than Kappa, your sorority, that you were involved in?
Theta.
Or Kappa?
Theta.
Excuse
me.
me.
Be sure and get that
I
straight.
got Kappa on my mind. I said that twice. Theta, excuse me.
Oh, I was in Panhellenic and business, the business sororities, and and I was president of my chapter at a Theta chapter last year.
Mm-hmm. So you're president of your sorority then?
Uh-huh.
Great. Mm-hmm. Were there some favorite hangouts that, student places that you frequented at that time?
Well, as Bob said, swims, and of course that was totally opposite where I lived, and nobody had cars, we walked, so that's when I learned to drink coffee, because you just would take anything hot. And I cannot think of the name of it. It was like a little house right in the middle of the sorority section, and they had the most wonderful hot chocolate. So I remember that. So it's right next to the drugstore. But anyway, those were the hangouts.
Was the old Y hut still there that was by where would have been north where the student union is now? Of course, the student union wasn't there, but might have been an older couple of Y hut. Do you recall that?
I don't.
Okay. So what, Pat, what year did you graduate then?
1948.
48, because I remember a little bit of the story that Bob was sharing with us. So you met Bob then when he came back from the war.
The big war, yes.
In 40, so it was the fall of 47?
47, yes.
Okay. Is there a story about how you met?
Well, actually, I was going with a good friend of his, and the Beta House was just about a half a block from the Theta House. And one day I looked up, and here was this good-looking guy in a gray flannel, double-breasted suit. And at that point, hardly anybody even had suits. It was right after the war, and you could hardly buy suits. And I thought it was the best-looking thing I had ever laid eyes on. So we got acquainted, and even though he stood me up on our second date because he overslept, I forgave him, and the rest is history.
You love that suit.
Suit. That was so good looking.
So when did you, Pat, first start learning about Bob's family ties? With his dad being the first graduating class, and
Actually, that was a non-factor, because he didn't advertise that. As he said, he wanted to do it on his own. I did meet his father. We borrowed his car one weekend for two couples of us went up to Pawhuska, and I met him because we were a little bit late getting back, and he was pacing in front of the Beta House waiting for his car. And then after Bob graduated, he had a stroke about that time, and he was in a nursing home. So since Bob wasn't there, I visited him a number of times and got to know him fairly well. And then he never was able to function much after that. So that's really all I knew. And I might have known vaguely about the first graduating class, but not much was made of it at that point.
Did you get to know his father fairly well when you were visiting with him? What do you remember about him?
Not well, really. He was too ill at that point to ever. I was glad I got to meet him when he was in good health, but it was not exactly a good situation when we were late with the car. So, but that was just a meeting, and that was about it. But and I'm sorry I didn't get to know him better. But of course, I've been a visit. He was pleased that I came to visit him.
And he died in 1950.
Yes.
But he'd had a stroke about a year before that. Is that right?
Several years, a couple of years.
A couple of years before that. So
about 3 years, I guess. And he ended up going to live with Bob's brother and his wife in Oklahoma City. Is about the last 6 months to a year, and he died there at their home. 1950.
Well, can you tell me, I kind of got a question that says, do you know you can tell me about the real Bob Adams? I mean, what are some things about him that most people outside the family wouldn't know?
Well, I think they all know the fact that he's extremely outgoing. Everybody just loves him. He's personality plus, and he loves to, for instance, he plans trips for our Sunday school class, has planned many trips, and they all just love it. So he's an organizer.
people person, isn't he?
Very much a people person. That's why he always wanted to be in sales.
That's great. Can you share a little bit of information about your life together? Bob had kind of shared, but I thought I might get your perspective, and kind of as you were married then in 48.
Married in 48, and he immediately, or after about 6 months, he got this job that he loved with Dodge Brothers. They'd never taken anybody nearly that young. But he talked his way into it, and we went to Amarillo and loved being there. And I feel very blessed because we've had such a, what I consider, normal life and blessed life. So you'll have me crying here in a minute because I feel very, very fortunate.
Tell me about the girls a little bit.
Oh, well, the pride of our lives. Our oldest daughter, Katie, was born in 1950. And when it became time for her to go to college, she was planning to go to Texas Tech and had her roommate picked out and all that. But we went up to a homecoming and took her and at OSU, of course, and we were thumbing through some of those carousels that they had, old pictures and history and so forth. And I think that came out at that point that her grandfather was the first person to enroll at Oklahoma A&M. And at the very last minute, she changed her mind. She said, "There's just too much history here. I want to come to Oklahoma A&M." So she did.
You probably excited about that.
Oh, yes, we both were very pleased. And but I love to tell the story that Bob tells often is that this Texas girl went to Oklahoma to school, married a fella from New Mexico, and moved to Idaho. So, but she married Johnny Gates, who had gone to OSU and Oklahoma. It was OSU at that point, yes. So we've and she has now our first great granddaughter. So,
that's always exciting.
Yes, yes. And she has 3 children, and she and Johnny have 3 children, and then the oldest boy has the great granddaughter.
And I understood that some of Johnny's kids also went to Oklahoma State University. Is that right?
No, none of the
that's
other.
Jimmy. I'm giving him a short straight. Okay.
None of them went to Oklahoma State because they were raised in Boise, Idaho, so they just had no knowledge of other than they came to a reunion or two with us, or when we had these nice honors for Bob's dad and uncle. But other than that, they just had no connection. So,
Pat, speaking of connections, Bob has shared some of his thoughts, but from your perspective, how special is it to Bob and the family about your tie historically with Oklahoma State, with the land run? Is that something you talk about? Is it a point of pride with the family?
Frankly, when we were first married, we moved a lot, and we were not in close proximity to Stillwater, so that was kind of on the back burner. But then, since we've been back in Dallas and have had all these, well, OSU's been wonderful to us in honoring the first 2 fellows, and so it's meant more and more and more, as oftentimes I think things like that do as you get older. And Bob's been influential in getting several young men to go to OSU. And he was honored by his fraternity several years ago, and it's just become a big, wonderful part of our lives.
Well, backing up a little bit, Bob was probably too modest to mention, what are some recognitions and some honors that he's received during his career that you can recall?
Oh, he was president of there's an business organization associated with his being a manufacturer's rep, and he's president of that, and
it's a national organization.
Yes, national organization.
Wow.
And like I say, honored by Beta several years ago, and I can't think.
You mentioned you have organized some Sunday school classes.
Oh, he's
You've
been
been active in the
president of the
church.
Sunday school class. Yes, we're very active in our church.
What's your church?
Highland Park Methodist.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Highland Park United Methodist Church. Here in
Very,
Dallas.
very well known, very large church, isn't it?
Oh, extremely.
Mm-hmm.
Second largest in Methodism in the U.S.
Wow.
But yes, and we've just dearly loved it. And he's been extremely active in our Sunday school class and in other activities in the church.
Any other organizations or activities you can call that he's been involved with?
Oh, you mean like civic?
Civic organizations?
No, he never has. By virtue of his traveling during our early life and most of our life in Dallas, it kind of precluded him being able to do too much of that type of thing. So, but I was always so pleased that, because we've known other men who traveled, and on Saturday they would go out and play golf, but he never did because he wanted to be with his family.
That's great. What about, Bob's Uncle Arthur had passed away before you had a chance before you'd met Bob.
Yes.
But what do you remember hearing, stories about him? Can you recall, because as you said earlier, Arthur was, your dad was very close to his Uncle Arthur. What do you remember about him, what he said and others have said about Arthur?
Oh, I think his children and grandchildren are kind of a product of that, because they all just adored him, and they turned out so well. I think they were, he was just a wonderful, ideal influence for them. And I'm just very sorry I didn't get to know him.
Well, speaking of getting to know him, Bob told us a little bit about that first reunion at your property there in Angel Fire, which by the way must be a very beautiful property. It's a beautiful area.
It is. It's very pretty.
So, what was the impetus for getting the group together to come out of that centennial commencement event at OSU? And so, from that, is that Bob decided is he kind of the initiator of that first reunion?
It is, and I'll add a few details to that instance.
Thank you.
The three children, the three Girardi are their names. They were children of Walter's sister, Nina, and her husband. And they were dressed in period costume. All of this, we were sort of taken aback. We didn't realize it was going to be such a wonderful celebration. It was on television, I understand, and it was lovely. And then afterwards, as we say, we on the floor, Walter and Diane and Walter's three sisters and their husbands were also there. And then we visited. Then the next morning, Diane had a lovely brunch at their house, and that's when we really got acquainted. And right then and there, Bob said, we shouldn't let this drop. We should continue this. So he started sending, when he kind of had the date set in his mind, he started sending out letters with the questionnaires. The heading was the picture of the four brothers. And there were questions like, which brother did so-and-so? Which brothers were in the oil business? Which brother did this and that? And several of them have told us later that they really would kind of going to ignore that, but it piqued their interest. And I think he sent out 3 or 4, possibly, letters. And the one brother, Oscar, who only had one surviving relative, granddaughter who lived in San Diego, she said, didn't think anything of it. She'd never met any of us, but it just got her to thinking. So she came, and this has started friendships between. For instance, one time Walter was being a pilot, was stranded in Washington D.C. at Christmas. He couldn't get out; it was snowing so hard. So he called one of Jimmy's boys, as it happened, that lived in Rockville, Maryland, the minister, and spent Christmas with them. And then the girl from San Diego has become very close to one of Jimmy's son's wife. they're both very interested in music, and so it's just grown and expanded. So I thought
Who was the most interesting person in the family reunion that you got together, the Adams reunion at your home there in 91?
I think it was the nice women that came in the kitchen and helped me cook.
You would remember that.
I would remember that. No, but one story that's sort of not real cute, but I'll tell it anyway. Our daughter Julie was sort of in charge of the entertainment, and as Bob said, one of the evenings they got up and were supposed to tell something about themselves, the first reunion. And then Julie, one of her questions, who's been married the longest? Well, of course it was Bob and me. And the second was, she asked Bob, and to what do you attribute the longevity and pleasantries of your marriage? And he said, I just say yes, dear.
Yes, dear. That's a good.
So anyway, it's just a little
good.
aside. But anyway, we just had a great time, and they're people of all ages. I mean, they brought their children, but Bob and I were the oldest there, of course. Well, not entirely, but mainly. Especially the last one, we definitely are. So.
Pat, let me ask you this question. I'm asking Julie again here in a little bit also, but out of the four brothers, there's Walter, and then Arthur was second, and then Oscar was third, and then James Homer. From which one of those had the most attendance? Which brother descendants?
I think you'll have to ask Julie about that. I'm not real sure. It should have been Jimmy with 5 children, Jimmy's family. His widow was, not his widow, his wife was there. Jimmy wasn't able to be.
Yeah, the reunion is about the Adams family, not just OSU. It's all the descendants.
Family.
Of course, out of that, then you sort of had, I guess, sort of a sub-reunion of OSU people. As part of that as well.
It would either be our family, Bob's and mine. I think probably, and then Jimmy's family probably would have been second. Of course, we knew those children, and of course, just the one from Oscar. Oscar was the least known, I think, of any of the brothers.
And was that the girl that was out in San Diego?
Yes,
that was a relationship.
Because Oscar just had 3 daughters, and just one of them married, and so she and she just had one daughter. So.
Okay. I'm sure that there were some new stories. I mean, new people you met, new stories. What were some of the favorite stories you heard at that first family reunion?
Oh my! Well, like I say, Bob's answer to Julie's question was probably the best. Oh, I think Johnny wouldn't want me telling this, or Katie wouldn't. Our daughter Katie, his husband Johnny, they were asked, well, how did they meet? Well, as a football player, he was invited to her sorority house, and that's how they met, and they started dating. And then he said, well, how did we fall in love is because Katie could cram her whole fist in her mouth, and now who would turn down a deal like that? I'm probably telling you things you can edit out.
That's great.
But there are various stories, like Jerry, for instance, had not married till late, and his wife Karen had been married and had 2 daughters, and we were all just overjoyed. He was a wonderful young man when he married, and then they had a daughter. So he's died quite young of cancer, which was a shame.
Pat, what do you take away from kind of the historical significance of the Adams family? To you kind of married into the family. You've looked at the history of the family, and now you know some of the people. Is that special to you, and in what ways is that special, the Adams family?
It's very special, even though I wasn't, one of the Adams at that point, because I think each and every one of them have great pride in this, and I applaud the university for being so kind to the Adams family and, pointing out the history and all of the brothers' being the first graduates and so forth. So it just anytime we get together more now, and it's always it's through the OSU.
Looking back, kind of changing subjects a bit with Bob again. Bob, he seems to have a special feeling about Oklahoma State University in the sense of history and place.
Yes.
And yet, interestingly enough, his relationship with his father was, because his father and mother got divorced when he was young, and so he was really raised by his mother. So I guess would it be fair to say that what rekindled his interest or kindled his interest in Oklahoma State University when he was growing up? Was it more his dad, or was it more Arthur, or what was
when he was young?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fact that his dad had been there,
Mm-hmm.
and his several cousins,
Mm-hmm.
and cousins that he really enjoyed,
Mm-hmm.
and his dad, of course, loved OSU, and there just simply wasn't ever any question. In fact, I've heard him say, "My life started when I went to OSU."
Is that right?
To Oklahoma A&M,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
When he enrolled?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
because it's high school had been a little difficult since his parents were divorced, and he didn't really see a lot of his father. Although he would take him out to the New Mexico property in the summertime, and he was definitely present in his life, but they weren't. That's why he doesn't have too many memories, because they weren't together that much.
What was was it Oscar that claimed the land in New Mexico? Is that right?
Arthur actually claimed the land in New
Arthur.
Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
but apparently Oscar was in very poor health, and so they got together and decided that Oscar would go to New Mexico for his health, and then they built a lodge, a guest lodge, and Bob's dad would take him out there in the summertime quite often, and some guest houses, very rustic, but we took our daughters out there many times. Beautiful place.
Was it Arthur that built the lodge?
I think Oscar did.
Oscar, okay. Mm-hmm.
And then Oscar's, well, they did have another daughter, Nina, and she loved the place so that after Oscar and Minnie, his wife's death, Nina took over, and she and her husband continued the property and the guest homes, and
But it was Arthur that originally claimed it
that's what we understand.
Original homesteaded the land there. Was it a land run or a land lottery or something?
I don't know about that.
He made the original claim when they opened up the territory.
I don't know how that came about, but of course he was looking after his brother to send him out there for his health, which was very beneficial, apparently.
Well, Pat, is there anything we've left out from your perspective we should talk about the Adams family, something special that you remember? And we talked about the dedication ceremony at the Adams Market, the panel on the
lovely panel.
what we call cowboy jeans, OSU families, but the lead family in that panel was the Adams family. In recognition, we had the reenactment of the first class presentations. But are there anything we've left out that you'd like to mention or talk about?
No, I just feel privileged to be a part of it. An inadvertent part, I guess you might say. And we've just grown to be so close, the Adams family, which, before, just branches of the family didn't even know each other. So, and that's been brought about by OSU itself, by presenting these various honors. And so it's been my privilege to get, because I just love them all too.
Pat, appreciate you taking time to visit with us.